Back in the 80s, when my parents bought their first home in Australia, they paid $400,000, which at the time was 4 times their combined income of a couple in this country. Today, that home would now be worth 20 times the combined average income of a couple in this country. Since coming out of the global financial crisis, central banks have slashed interest rates to almost 0%, and in some cases have even gone to negative rates. This, combined with the fact that there hasn't actually been any proper wage growth in the last 10 years, means that the idea of owning a home for a lot of Aussies is pretty much impossible, unless you're one of the 40,000 Australians that have a taxable income of more than $500,000, or one of the 15,000 Australians that have an income of just over $1 million. The idea of owning a home is a dream for a lot of people. It's your own place, and it's also an asset that increases in value as you make mortgage repayments. Just imagine being able to have your own place, not having to pay rent at all, and not have to do anything at all whilst its value increases at an average annual rate of 6.8% every year, or 5.9% if you own a unit. Any further money that you make can just be put into the share market or into other investment properties and give you free rent. So in today's video, I want to talk about how you can realistically save up for a house and do this the right way so that you can actually get onto the property ladder. Now, this video isn't about the actual process of buying a home. You can see that in this other video that I've made here, but let's get into today's video. I'm going to get right to the chase here. You're not going to be able to save up for a home just by simply saving alone. In my opinion, the only way to do it is by investing your savings into the stock market as you start saving for a house deposit. Unless you're only planning to put down 5 or 10%, and you've worked in a job for some time and are able to start making some proper money after a couple of years of experience. Do you really want to spend the majority of your 20s living at home with your parents just so you can save up for a house deposit like me? When you're saving up for a house, and to quote from Rich Dad Poor Dad, remember that savers are losers. Just have a look at this picture, which says 1,000 words. This is a chart of the last 120 years of the Dow Jones Industrial Average, and you can see why savers are losers. Of course, there's been numerous crashes during this time, including the GFC, dot-com, and Great Depression crash. But in all cases, the market eventually recovered afterwards. In fact, when the market crashed in March 2020, it took less than a year for it to fully recover, and now we're at record highs. Since 2000, with the aim of saving the economy, central banks have slashed their interest rates to record lows, or almost 0%. The official cash rate in Australia is at a record low of 0.1%. And despite warnings of inflation and a red hot property market, it doesn't look like they're going to raise interest rates anytime soon. Governments and leaders want people to believe that slashing rates is good for people and also for the economy as well. In reality, this is just making the rich richer and leaving the poor and middle class out of the property market. This picture says it all. After each crash, the Federal Reserve printed more and more money, effectively devaluing the dollar every year. And in today's market, you would only be able to get 1, maybe even a maximum of 2% if you just saved your money in a high interest savings account. And you still have to pay tax on top of this anyway. But in reality, this isn't actually helping your savings because inflation is devaluing your savings every year by 3 to 4%. So even if you do earn interest on your savings, it's probably still going to be devaluing every year by 1 to 2% anyway. I don't know about you guys, but having to pay tax on savings is a pretty bad idea. So let's imagine you worked really hard and you managed to save $50,000. That's going to devalue by 3 to 4% every year due to inflation, which is actually 1.5 grand. Now, even if you did make a bit of interest on this, imagine losing 1.5 grand every single year just by simply not doing anything with your savings. That's a full 1 to 2 weeks of full-time work for a lot of people. So the key point I'm trying to make here is that unfortunately savers are losers when it comes to trying to just save your money in order to buy a house deposit, and also just building wealth more generally as well. But to further illustrate my point, here is a chart of Aussie house prices since the 70s paired to the national average wage. Since 2001, house prices have risen by 70% in Sydney and by 50% in Melbourne. And whilst I think it's great that this is benefiting people who have worked really hard to save their money and buy a house several decades ago, the problem here is that wage growth is barely keeping up with inflation. Here we can see that wage growth is averaging to less than 2% 2% per year, every year. So unless you work for the government and you're guaranteed to get a 2.5% pay rise every year, it means that real wage growth is flat for a lot of Australians. And it also means that their salaries are being devalued every year by 1 to 2%. So unless you can say with 100% confidence that your role is going to eventually lead to a promotion and a pay rise or better financial opportunities in the future, it's unlikely that any significant amount of saving is going to get you to the point of being able to pay for a house deposit. Now, if the national median house price in Australia was $400,000 back in 2013, it has since increased to $600,000 5 years later. That means that if you originally budgeted for a house deposit back in 2013, you would have needed about $80,000 for that house down payment. So if you were extremely frugal and managed to save $20,000 per year every single year, you're going to need about 4 years to save up. But now look at what's happened. Now the price of the house that you originally budgeted $80,000 for is no longer worth $400,000 because it's now increased to a value of $600,000 over that 5-year time period, meaning the deposit that you now need for this house is no longer $80,000. It's $120,000. So you're going to need another $40,000 on top of your original deposit. So if you saved for another 2 years after that, then things won't be looking good either, because then during that time, the median house price would have increased to $720,000, meaning that your $120,000 that you've worked really hard to save for over the last 6 years still isn't enough to put down as a 20% deposit on the median national house price in Australia. Feels like chasing your tail, doesn't it? There's two ways you can react to this. The first is to give up, throw in the towel, and complain about it on news.com.au. Like this couple who said it was just too hard after 3 years of hard work and savings, and then get jealous because they've missed out on buying these huge multi-million dollar properties in Point Piper, which are being snapped up by rich overseas buyers. Now, I'm sure this couple are extremely hardworking and they definitely deserve to find a great home. But unfortunately, this is another example of showing how just saving alone just isn't going to cut it. Now, this isn't financial advice, but let's have a look at the price of the Australian housing market versus the price of the Australian stock market as well. They both look pretty similar, don't they? So if you want to save for a house, then in my opinion, you have to make the savings work for you. And in my opinion, the easiest way to do this is to just buy an ETF which tracks the overall stock market, like IOZ or NDQ, and just consistently dollar cost average into that fund until your savings grow into a healthy deposit. And in my opinion, this strategy works because even if the price of the ETF goes down, then you can simply just buy more of that ETF later on once you've got more saved up. Or alternatively, you can just wait for it to go up and see your savings increase. I did this earlier in the year and I found that my overall share portfolio dropped by 10%, or almost $20,000 at one point. But I didn't panic, I just held on, and now I'm up almost 7%. And I don't know about you guys, but getting a 7% return on my money for simply doing nothing after a few months is pretty good. It really just comes down to making sure that your money works for you, so that your savings are in line with the rising and falling of the property market. And who knows, maybe in 5 years, when you do finally save up enough money for a house deposit, you may have changed your mind by that point in time as well. Maybe you decide at that point that you actually don't want to buy property, and instead you just want to build a bigger share portfolio and build it up to the point that you can comfortably retire off and live off the dividends. Regardless, you don't want to be working so hard for so many years and saving as much as you can, only to find that you're just chasing your tail and you can't keep up with the increase in the property market. So that's my first bit of advice. Now that we've looked at why it's best to invest whilst you're saving for a property, I want to go through some further examples of why I personally think this is the best approach. Again, this isn't financial advice because anything is unique to your own financial circumstances. But let's go back to March 2020 when the stock market crashed. Yes, obviously, if you invested all of your money before then, like January or February, then you would have lost a lot of savings, which is obviously why a lot of people don't recommend this approach, because no one knows where the share market is going to be within the next year or two. But even if you managed to save up all of your money and still had all that cash on the side whilst the market crashed, would you have really gone all in during that time as well? Because at the time, I remember everyone was too afraid to jump in whilst the market had bottomed out. People were just really worried that the market was going to go down further or they were going to lose their jobs, and they ended up just missing out on the huge rally afterwards. But you can get around this by dollar cost averaging. And this strategy involves investing a proportion of your take-home pay each and every month, regardless of where the stock market is. Dollar cost averaging is good because it means you don't invest all of your money up front, whilst at the same time making sure that you can continue to invest invest whilst the stock market goes down. Now, there's quite a lot of debate about this, but for the most part, studies show that dollar cost averaging can deliver as good investment returns compared to if you just chucked all of your money into the stock market at once. Now, of course, your strategy might want to be different if you're investing for the long term, but if you're looking to buy a house, then my opinion would be to dollar cost average. This chart compares the performance of $5,000 as a lump sum investment after 10 years compared to just dollar cost averaging by investing $500 a month over that same period into the S&P 500. It shows that you would technically have $314 more by going with the lump sum payment strategy as opposed to dollar cost averaging, which is barely any difference at the end of the day. Mentally as well, you wouldn't have freaked out when the stock market crashed because by dollar cost averaging, you've still got a lot of cash on the side and ready to invest even when the market is declining. Also, if you decided to sell your stocks within 1 to 2 years and maybe came out with a loss, then you wouldn't actually be down that much compared to a lump sum payment. Now, there is another way that you can technically save up for a house deposit in Australia, and that's by putting more of your money into your superannuation or your retirement fund, and then being able to withdraw that money with tax benefits before the settlement period. I won't go into too much detail with this because it's actually best to cover this in a separate video, but you can essentially contribute up to $15,000 per year into your superannuation account, and you could then take that money out up to the value of $30,000 and put it towards your home. But that's the topic for another video. So now that you know the best way to save up for a house, the question now becomes, how hard are you willing to work to be able to save for a house deposit? And this is where I strongly recommend that a lot of people should get some sort of second job or at least a side hustle to build up their savings and their income. A solid side hustle could net you an extra 10, 20, or possibly even 30 grand a year after tax, if you can find a solid side hustle that people are willing to pay you a lot of money for. If you're fortunate, then the best route is to try and tutor people at either high school or at university. But if you can't do something like that, then you could even participate in scientific research studies. You could even take up a second job, which just pays a good casual wage every Sunday. It doesn't have to be something hard or super stressful. It can just simply be something that you enjoy and earn a bit of money extra on the side. And who knows, maybe you even develop some new skills and you meet some new people as well. Having a side hustle really increases your earnings growth and puts you ahead of the competition when it comes to the auction. Because when you're at the auction, it gets very intense trying to outbid the competition. You really don't want to be in a position where you miss out on losing the house to a competing bidder just because they've managed to bid an extra $5,000, $10,000, or $20,000 on top of your bid. So hopefully you guys have realized that it's not just about saving in order to get into the property market. You really have to do whatever it takes, and saving alone is just not going to get you there, in my opinion. But is it worth it? Of course it is. Owning a property is such a great opportunity to get ahead financially. If you can find a property with a mortgage repayment that's basically the same as a rental payment, then you're still making gains financially. Because every month that you make your mortgage repayment, you're effectively owning an asset that's increasing in value as well. It also means that you're building more equity in the property. And the best part yet is that you don't have to pay any capital gains tax if that property is your primary residence. And once you've gotten into the property market as well, capital gains is greater on the margin loan that you have borrowed compared to just savings alone. A 10% return on a property worth $1 million means that you're making $100,000 versus a 10% return on $10,000 in savings means that you're only making $1,000. If you are interested in saving, investing, or getting into the property market, I would love it if you could subscribe to my channel and check out some of my other videos as well. I'm going to continue uploading more and more content throughout this year that shows that you don't need to be rich, wealthy, educated in order to become a millionaire. Thanks for watching.